Hi there, welcome to this video all about installing the Windows version of Droplet computing software 2.0. I've copied some files and extracted some files to this machine to save some time, just to speed up the video. So on my hard drive I've got a copy in downloads of our software. I'm going to install that. I'm using the MSI here, so it basically asks me no questions, so that's the software installed. And if I double click the icon on the desktop here and choose open, it'll say where is your license. So I'll choose yes to that. Again, I've got my license file in the Droplet folder as well. I accept the end user license agreement and the software is now installed. On the hard drive I've already extracted a Droplet image file. Just to give you an idea of some of the numbers and letters here, we have different generations of the Droplet containing image, a DCI-X, an M7, an M10. Some of them are 32-bit, some of them are 64-bit. The DSA stands for Droplet Service Apps, Seamless Apps, and 2.7 we basically do our own versioning of the actual images as we develop them. So all I need to do now is allocate a certain amount of memory and CPU to the container and turn on hardware acceleration. So a word about that hardware acceleration. You'll notice in help and about it says hardware acceleration is WHPX. How did that get there? Well, we're using built into Windows a hardware accelerator that Microsoft call WHPX, or the performance extensions, and the way that's enabled from the UI is by putting a tick in this box for the Windows hypervisor platform and then doing a reboot. Microsoft seem to have lots of different names for this. We know it as the Windows hypervisor performance extensions. It's basically a set of APIs and SDKs that allows us to speak to the Intel VT chip. The other nice thing about this is that it's compatible with things like device guard and Microsoft virtualization based security. So I can turn that on. The next thing I need to do is actually tell it where the image file is. So I've put that on the root of C in the Droplet images folder. This is more of a convention. It's entirely up to you where you store the Droplet image. I put it on the root of C in a folder. Just to be a little bit wary of permissions and rights on that folder. So make sure it's read-writable for users or for the users that will use it on this machine. You can occasionally get a pop-up error if the user wanting to run the container doesn't have read rights to the file. And then all I need to do now is start the container. The startup of the container varies depending on how much memory, CPU, how fast your hard disk is, and of course hardware acceleration is a must. This particular application, most of the time end users don't really interact with it, and it will be minimized to the system tray. What they usually interact with is actually a shortcut on the desktop. So we've got a default shortcut with a default Droplet logo of Notepad. So that's the container loaded, and what I will do is just minimize this application to the system tray and launch my first Droplet Seamless app. So that's the application loaded. We tend to publish as a default a sample app like Notepad, and that's mainly so you don't just start up the application and be left with just a blank interface with no shortcut on the actual app itself. For the most part, this UI here is kind of handled by the administrator. It's a nice graphical front end for the administrator. It's not something that the user would normally interact with. And it's locked and protected until such time as the administrator unlocks the container to do some work on it. Once the container is unlocked, you'll notice I get this plus symbol, which allows me to add in other application definitions. And of course, the existing definitions can be modified. So for example, I could run through this wizard and change the default icon that we've got there for an icon that is a bit more user-friendly for the end user. We do use Microsoft ICO files because they're the ones that back shortcuts. Watch what happens to my shortcut on my desktop when I click finish here. Yep, so the shortcut's now updated with a more friendly view. And I could, like, make calculator and other things available within the container. What's more interesting is actually to install some software. Once the container is unlocked, it exposes a toolbox of different utilities, things like a command prompt, for example. So if I need to get to the registry to make special registry changes, I can do. Also, you'll find standard tools like the group policy system are available as well. So we don't break or modify the Windows-based security model. You can still use policy tools and things like that to bolt the container down even further than we've done already. Typically what most administrators are wanting to do is open up Explorer and then get to their software repository so they can install their software. I've got one on my network. It's just a NAS box where I load up all my software. So there's my shares, and inside software and Droplet computing, third-party software, I've got a repository of different versions of Microsoft Office. So I'll do a typical install of Microsoft Office to this particular system. So the main thing to mention is in terms of the install itself, there's no special sequencing or recording or packaging process involved in the aspect of installing software. Software is installed into the container just as it would be to an ordinary Windows system. Obviously, you do need to know about your application dependencies. So if this application needed .NET or a version of Java, you would want to install those dependencies first. Yeah. So I'm going to carry on with the install here. You're not going to miss anything unless you really like watching Office 2003 installed. So we'll resume the video once this installation is completed. Well, the installation is finished. I think what's interesting, because of our seamless experience, that might have looked like I was installing this product to Windows 10, but actually I wasn't. I was installing it to the hard drive Droplet image of the container. So there's Microsoft Office, Office 11, and there's an ancient version of Excel. Yep. So the next thing I can do as an administrator is go back to my container here and create a application tile for that particular app. So let's say this particular user needs Microsoft Excel. I know the name of the executable is excel.exe. Most good installers, you don't have to type in the full path. Less good installers, you do have to type in the path to where the executable is. I then assign an icon to it. So I've got an icon file ready here for the application. Next, and finish. That dumps the shortcut to the user's desktop, and I can run Excel from that system. Do a little bit of post configuration as well, tidying things up with the menus. Maybe I don't like the way that splash screen appears. Yeah, it gives them a bit more real estate, so when they run the application it just loads up straight away. Yeah, so that's the application installed. Of course, we don't expect administrators to, if you had 100 machines, go through this 100 times. Yeah. So very much we have the concept of this is the reference machine, the machine I'm testing from. Once I'm happy the application runs, all I need to do is collect a few files up, copy to the network, and then use whatever my deployment tool is to push out the software and say, hey, when this user logs on or this particular system boots up, download all these files to that particular PC and the application will run just the same. Of course, multiple different users each have their own profile, and this UI here is stored in their profile environment. So we know that there is WinWord and PowerPoint.exe and a lot of other executables in here, but this acts as a kind of publishing front end. So if Sally logs in, she gets 5 icons, but if Billy logs on, he gets 3. All of those could be serviced from the same container. So we've abstracted away the UI presentation layer from the container, which is the repository of all those particular executables. So that's setting up the Windows version. One last thing I want to show is how to turn this into a Windows service. Yeah, I'm currently running in a per user mode where it would be up to the user to start this application as and when they needed it. That works well in an environment where the application is used once a week, once a month, or every other quarter, or maybe used to retrieve data from a legacy system as and when needed. If it's an application that's needed all the time, constantly in place, we can actually make this not be an application that the end user starts manually with the Start Container button, but an application that runs as a Windows service. So there's a couple of steps to this, but it's quite simple. First of all, I need to retrieve the settings file from the user's profile, from my kind of demo user, if you like. So the file I'm looking for is called settings.json. It's just a text file which basically contains the settings of how the application starts, how much memory and CPU is allocated, and so forth. And I'm going to take this version of settings.json, which is per user, and put it in a location where it can be accessible by a service. Yeah. So what we do is we actually put this into program data, and we put it in a folder called Droplet. So it's just a file in a different location. And the next thing I do is open up a command prompt and actually register the service with the Windows system. So if I go to the root of the C drive here and into the Droplet directory, you'll see there's a bunch of files. There's actually a couple of folders here as well. So there's a folder called Resources, a folder called Container, and a folder called Services. And that's where our main executable is, where we actually define this application to run as a computer service, not as a per user application. The difference is that in the per server model, when the machine is rebooted, the actual container will start automatically and be running there in the background. We'll still have our little application running in the system tray, but it won't be the thing that actually launches the application. It's just a kind of agent in this particular model. To define the service, all I have to do is droplet service.exe and install, and that's the service installed. I find it's helpful to actually do a reboot at this point, which emulates more how the system would be used by the end user. Power on the machine, the container is already there. So let's do a restart of this system, and then I'll show you the service and how it's being defined. Back in a second. Okay, well, the system has restarted. One change you'll notice is with the actual core app. When you start it, there won't be any starting of the container or an orange button to say start the container. The container's already started. So the app just loads because the container is already running. I can show you that by having a look at the services application here. And you can see that there's a Droplet service running on this machine. What I usually do with a computer that's in a service mode is I generally create a new shortcut, and then I modify that shortcut to have some special properties called launch -- minimized, using S for the British English rather than the American English. Now what I can do with that particular shortcut is I can copy it and put it into the startup profile of this particular system in what's called Common Startup. So if I do a double click here, the application starts, but automatically starting in the system tray without any pop-ups. And that really means I don't really need this icon anymore. All I need to do is to advertise a shortcut to the user's desktop or start menu, and the client application, which speaks to find out what applications are available to the user, is running minimized. And when the user does a double click, it just launches the application automatically. So some of our customers prefer this model because it's not like the users logging in and then starting the container and then they get their application. The user fires up their machine. Before they even get to a logon processing, start to log onto the machine, the container will already started. And so it's a bit more of a kind of light touch approach. I imagine as the years roll by, this particular UI here that we've still got for the administrator to do graphical management will get smaller and smaller and become more like a service manager rather than a kind of end user application. But that's installing Droplet computing to a Windows machine. Thank you for watching.